Generally damp over Western Hills as the cloud thickens and lowers on Friday night into the start of the weekend. And the breeze picks up as well. Gales in the far north and northwest, and with the breeze and the cloud in many places, it's a much milder start to the day compared to Friday morning. But it's a grey start, a breezy start, and a wet and windy start for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. A brief spell of really quite lively winds as the rain sinks south. Cloudy and mild in the south, turning colder further north with some wintry showers over Scottish mountains, but brighter skies at the same time. Sunday will turn very windy later on.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hey, welcome along. I'm Mark Steyn, live on GB News TV and GB News Radio. Feel free to watch or listen according to taste, or do a little of both. Mix and match. Would you like an alternative to the last 2 years? Yeah, well, good luck with that. Plus, the selective butchness of Australia and who doesn't China already own? And as always, the only part of the show we can't do without your questions and comments. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me, twerk me, I forget which one it is, at GB News, because Stump the Steyn is coming up. All that, of course, after the news with Tamsin Roberts.
Mark, thank you. Here are the top stories from the GB newsroom. The Foreign Secretary has defended using the government's plane to fly with her team to Australia earlier this month. Reports estimate the journey could have cost the taxpayer as much as £500,000. Liz Truss says every government decision is based on value for money, and the plane is available to ministers for official travel. The Foreign Office says the trip was within the rules set by the Ministerial Code. Boris Johnson has rejected claims he intervened to get animals out of Afghanistan. Charity founder Pen Farthing launched a campaign to evacuate his team and animals from Kabul when the Taliban seized control in August last year. The Prime Minister has repeatedly denied approving the rescue effort, despite new email evidence suggesting otherwise. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister says he will publish the Sue Gray report into alleged lockdown parties in full, but he hasn't confirmed when. Scotland Yard is investigating some of the events. Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer says for families who had to sacrifice so much, the truth is the least they deserve. The Health Secretary has urged all care homes to allow as many visitors as possible as limits are lifted in England from Monday. The government also announced changes to COVID testing for workers. Weekly PCR tests will be replaced by pre-shift lateral flows from the 16th of February. Sajid Javid says they've worked hard to make care homes as safe as possible.
It's always about getting the right balance between making sure visitors can come and people can be properly looked after, but also that the patients and people in care homes are as safe as possible.
Rape offences have hit a new annual high in England and Wales, according to the Office for National Statistics. There are more than 63,000 reported sexual crimes, of which more than a third were rapes. It follows separate figures which show the proportion of rape prosecutions has fallen to a record low. A remembrance service has been held in the Houses of Parliament to mark Holocaust Memorial Day. Speaker of the House, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, led events and lit candles. The Israeli ambassador to the UK, Zippy Hotovely, told GB News the Holocaust has a unique place in history.
Racism, hate crimes are things we need to fight, but the Holocaust as a holy place in the tragedies of the world is something very unique.
The UK ambassador to Israel there. And a Mini Bansky has sold at auction for £1 million. The miniature graffitied stable was secretly added by the artist to a seaside model village in Great Yarmouth last summer. The owners say the money will help secure the future of their attraction. This is GB News on TV, online and DAB+ radio. Now, though, it's back to Mark Steyn.
Let's just go back to the top story with Tamsin there that broke just an hour or so ago, that Liz Truss spent £500,000, not of her money, of your money, flying by private jet to Australia. Now, this wasn't a long time ago. This was the last few days, at a time when the government, the cabinet she sits in, is in trouble because the guy who is the Queen's First Minister doesn't live as you live. He has cakes, he has parties, he has Don't You Want Me Baby pumping out on the hi-fi. And so the issue before the government's in trouble because our rulers do not live as the people they rule are forced to do. And so Liz Truss, who's being touted as, we need to get rid of Boris Johnson so we can put Liz Truss in as Prime Minister instead. Liz Truss has just flown to Australia on a £500,000 private plane. No one knows who she is. Doesn't matter whether she's flying to Australia, doesn't matter whether she's flying to Papua New Guinea, doesn't matter whether she's flying to Newcastle. No one knows who 99.99% of the population of Papua New Guinea, Australia or Newcastle wouldn't recognise this woman. It's absolutely ridiculous that at a time when the issue before the people is that those who rule us do not feel bound to live as we do. And so we're going to get rid of Boris Johnson, party boy, cake boy, and replace Boris with £500,000 private flight girl. Yeah, that really makes a lot of sense. You know, I mentioned the other day on this show that I thought it'd be a good idea, and it's perfectly possible, perfectly legal, because wherever you live in Her Majesty's dominions, you are entitled to sit in what we used to call the Imperial Parliament. And my suggestion was that Tony Abbott, the Australian Prime Minister, should run for the leadership of the UK Tory party. And I'll tell you one reason I like Tony Abbott is because when he was Prime Minister, he booked a skiing holiday in the French Alps. And he took a flight from Sydney to Geneva. That's a long flight. The Prime Minister of Australia flew economy class. He was back there in row 237F. And the only reason we know about this is because the bloke in 237G, or whatever it was tweeting, I didn't get a wink of sleep last night. Had that Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, sitting next to me, kept yakking all night. But no, that's Tony Abbott. And that's why I'd rather he was the next leader of the UK Tory party than somebody who doesn't get it like Liz Truss. And I know the Tories are the stupid party. That's what they're always called. But there's a limit even to Tory stupidity. How could she think? There's no security reason for sending Liz Truss on a £500,000 flight. Nobody knows who she is and what's she going to do. Reveal the plans that she's coming up with to liberate Kiev after Putin takes it. It's ridiculous. Okay, I'm going to calm down. Going to have a few pills and a nice cup of herbal tea and lie down in a dark. Oh, I can't. I got to do a show. Okay, let's take a brisk tour d'horizon before we return to these islands. Back in the twilight of the Soviet Union, as you may recall, the old joke was that in Moscow supermarkets, every checkout line was for 9 items or less. Under bare shelves Biden and his supply chain disruptions, that joke has come to every American supermarket too. But they're not quite empty enough. You can still find the occasional can of generic brand cat food to get grandma through the weekend. So bare shelves Biden and Canada's 12-year-old Prime Minister Jacinda Trudeau decided to tighten the screws by imposing mandatory vaccination for cross-border truckers. In consequence, an estimated 10% of North American trucks are now sitting idle, so Grandma will have to stretch that can of Whiskers out for a fortnight. And as we mentioned earlier this week, this is really the most inspirational story of the week. A huge chunk of the rest of those trucks have formed a massive protest convoy that's due to converge on Ottawa this weekend. That's how it looked. I think that's in Thunder Bay. Anyway, this convoy is now over 50 miles long, and it's broken the record for the world's longest truck convoy. And even in the remotest rural areas, as you can see there are ordinary citizens lining the streets to cheer the convoy as it passes. They were out in Dryden, Ontario, population 7,000, and a huge proportion of that 7,000 were out there to cheer them. Now, lining the streets, as you'll know if you've been to Canada in January, lining the streets is not generally a popular or prudent thing to do in the frozen north. The midday high of in Dryden, Ontario, the midday high was zero. That's zero. And that's Fahrenheit, so it's minus 17 Celsius or centigrade. Actually, I'm not going to bother with Celsius. We should have dropped centigrade after Brexit. I'm just dropping a hint to our weather guys here. We should have dropped centigrade and Celsius after Brexit because real men shiver in Fahrenheit. But these crowds are not there only in what passes for the midday sun in frosty Ontario, but they're there in the even more frigid night hours too, loosing off fireworks as the truckers pass by. And while they're standing there loosing, I know you can get a bit of heat from the fireworks if you accidentally loosen up your trouser leg, but that's a nighttime low of minus 11 Fahrenheit. And they're cheering those truckers on their way. The city of Ottawa is preparing to cut the live stream of its municipal traffic cameras as the truckers approach so that they can go full Baghdad Bob on Canadians. There's no truth to rumours that the infidel truckers have taken the airport. These are just scurrilous lies. As for the Prime Minister of Canada, he says opinions contrary to the received wisdom of the beneficent, all-powerful state have no place in today's society.
The small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing do not represent the views of Canadians who have been there for each other, who know that following the science and stepping up to protect each other is the best way to continue to ensure our freedoms, our rights, our values as a country.
So these views are not, quote, acceptable. Today, Justin Trudeau, entirely by coincidence, announced he'd been exposed to the COVID, so he's having to isolate until these truckers leave town, along with most of the cabinet. This is the most boosted cabinet, even in the Western world. I don't know what they're up to now. They're on to their 5th or 6th jab. They all lie around in cabinet meetings, semi-naked, jabbing each other all day long, and it still doesn't prevent them coming down with the thing. So he's having to isolate. Are there any other parties in Canada? Well, the leader of Her Majesty's loyal opposition, a hollow nothing of a man called Erin O'Toole, has certainly taken the, quote, acceptability of the truckers' views to heart. He refuses to say whether he supports those guys or not. Indeed, he refuses to disagree with Justin Trudeau on anything, no matter how low Trudeau's numbers go. He is such a loyal opposition, he refuses to provide any opposition. He's like one of those backing singers who never gets to do anything but repeat the line the stars just sung in the fills. That is the short history of most of the Western world these last 2 years. Any alternative to COVID without end got shoved in the freezer circa March 2020, and there it stayed. Doesn't really matter whether nominal Conservatives are in power, as they are in London and Canberra. They're not doing anything Conservative. Scott Morrison down under is going to the country in the next 2 or 3 months. He may yet eke out a victory, but he hasn't done a single thing to deserve it. Meanwhile, from the rubble, not just of the economy, but of life, the wretched, pitiful final days of our elders, denied something as basic as the company of loved ones, the reduction of millions of children to confused, miserable, fearful creatures. From the rubble of our societies, what emerges? Bare shelves Biden has just begun shipping free masks to American households. The masks are made in, oh, go on, take a wild guess. Yes, made in China. Justin Trudeau wants everyone to get jabbed once every quarter, once every month, once every fortnight, whatever it takes. The syringes for those jabs are made in China. So China gets you coming and going. It makes the virus that totals the world, and it makes the masks and syringes that supposedly save you from the virus. Way back in March 2020, the PPE we didn't have enough of was made in China because it caught us by surprise. Whereas, unsurprisingly, Chairman Xi had apparently prepared for an increased demand in PPE from around the world. But we're about to begin our 3rd year on a so-called war footing, and the so-called superpower still has to import its masks from the perpetrator. Meanwhile, the tough guys in Washington threaten China over Taiwan and Russia over Ukraine. Dream on, you losers. China makes everything you need. And while it's true you can upturn every item in your home and not find anything with the Made in Russia label other than the vodka bottle, Joe Biden's America is now importing more crude oil from Russia than it does from Saudi Arabia. Over 11% of total US energy imports. Why? Because America's woke anti-energy left is down on domestic energy production, whether fracking, coal, the Keystone Pipeline. It feels much more virtuous to shut down the local coal mine and bulk up Putin's retirement account. Where do you think he got the money to put 130,000 troops on the Ukrainian border? The laughably misnamed free world is killing itself. After 2 years of the Great Reset, China is richer, Russia is bolder, America is weaker, and in Britain, Canada, Australia, Europe, millions and millions of people are poorer and sicker and have ever less freedom of movement, freedom of association, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, or even the freedom to retain your job. Chinese virus, Chinese mask, Chinese syringe, and Chinese freedoms. What do you make of all this? Should we be demanding reparations from Chairman Xi? Or should we be busting out of this? Should we be like whatever season that was of Dallas, where the plot had so jumped the tracks that at the end, Bobby Ewing stepped into the shower and they just went back 2 years to before all the craziness begins. Do we need Bobby Ewing to step into the shower and turn the clock back to 2019? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at GBNews. John O'Sullivan is president of the Danube Institute in Budapest and a former speechwriter for Mrs. Thatcher, which I'll bet is a lot more fun than being a speechwriter for Liz Truss, just fine-tuning the speech on the £500,000 private flight all the way over to Sydney. John, my sense of the last 2 years is that there's a great opportunity here for Western politicians who are prepared to take it. And yet, oddly enough, apart from a few Canadian truckers, nobody does seem to want to take the opportunity. People would like an alternative. Some people.
Yes. You mean among politicians? That's right. Obviously, as you've been demonstrating, a hell of a lot of people around the world are taking the opportunity to protest and to demand something else. It isn't just the Canadian and American truckers. There's the Gilets jaunes in France. There are these vast demonstrations in places like Austria, which normally are very pacific, but they're responding to extraordinarily authoritarian methods which are being imposed on their populations. It's only in the alleged authoritarian countries like Hungary where the lockdowns and so on, which are here, have been fairly sensitively and moderately enforced. And in Sweden, where, of course, they haven't had lockdowns at all, and consequently, I don't believe they've had any protests either. And indeed in England, which is finally getting out of this, what you're finding is that in the protesters are the ones now who are protesting against the demonstrations, as in Australia. The only protests which are now regarded as acceptable are those for left-wing causes. So the rule of the game is, if you're on the side of the people and the Conservatives, then your protests are not allowed. But if you're a left-winger, well, then the people obviously must be on your side, and there you can do anything. So I think I don't think you can underestimate the significance of this.
Oh, I think we've lost John there. We're going to try and get him back. Is John back there now? Have we got John? Okay, let's go back to John. Yeah, you were saying you're only allowed to protest if you're a left-winger. That's right. If you want to tear down a statue of some guy whose great-great-grandfather owned a plantation in the West Indies, that's a public health issue and you're free to rampage through the streets. But other than that, public protest is discouraged.
And that's because the protesters on the left are not really protesting. They're actually kind of endorsing the attitudes and policies of the progressive elites in government. And I think, for example, progressive elites essentially, these days, if there is a government that isn't progressive or doesn't want to be progressive, which is more common, they're somehow not allowed, and they become figures of their own supporters.
But why is it? Because I think this is true even when the Conservatives are not just in opposition, like that hollow fellow in Ottawa is, but even when they purport to be the government in London and in Australia, they haven't really pushed back against the so-called rule by experts, which means rule by bureaucrats who are advised by the WHO, who are the puppets of Chairman Xi on the Politburo.
Ruled by bureaucrats, ruled by international lawyers, ruled by an interlocking network of legal restrictions, of which no one ever consciously accepted. They sometimes said, sure, we're against torture. Let's say we're against torture. All of a sudden, 20 years later, the definition of torture is that you're not going to be allowed to live with your family after you've murdered somebody in prison. Now, my view of such questions, for example, is, yes, I believe in family reunification. We send the chap abroad and his family can join him. Now, I don't think it's reasonable for the hands be tied on an enormous range of issues to do with immigration, to do with foreign policy, to do with lawfare. All of these things are now taken out of democracy and put in the hands of these committees, which don't seem to be answerable to anybody. And that's why, for example, you need people in power. And we thought Boris was one of those. I think he'd like to be in a way. We thought Priti Patel was one, and she'd like to be. But they've got to be able to understand how to defeat the system before they can actually begin to introduce sensible reforms, meaning that you can deport people who committed terrible crimes in your country. Well, as we see in America, the extraordinary situation, the American government flying in illegally, letting them be dispersed by the community, giving them money, and in a sense, not exactly denying, but acting as if nothing is happening and not being challenged by a compliant media. This is quite extraordinary.
Well, the people are fools for putting up with this. I mean, they're shuffling shoeless through international airports, domestic airports. They're shuffling shoeless in a country supposedly on orange alert in America, at a time of global pandemic where a U.S. citizen can't fly from Paris to Boston without getting all his paperwork showing he's been double vaccinated and got a negative test result. And anyone can just walk across the southern border with the United States. But Britain, I think, is a particularly bad case of this because in the middle years of the last decade, all the talk was about leaving the European Union to take back control. And it turns out that when you take back control, well, Northern Ireland somehow got left out of that, so that's still being controlled by Brussels. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's being controlled by a European court. And then it turns out the domestic bureaucrats have basically the same ideas on everything as all the foreign bureaucrats had. So what's the solution for the Tories in punching through all that?
Well, there's not a simple answer to that question, but the first answer is to say that they've got to understand what the problem is. And the problem is that they do not really feel that the fact that they've been elected by the majority of the population and that their government rests on the consent of the people, they don't feel anymore that that's a sufficiently strong moral basis for them to contradict the decisions of international organizations. Why, for example, does the...
Oh, we seem to have lost Todd again. But that is an important point. That's a critical point he made just there. That for some reason they don't feel the will of the people gives them the more moral authority to disagree with the bureaucracy and the globalist civil servants who all think the same on everything that matters. Let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can ask me anything for Stump the Stein. That's at GB News for you Twitter aficionados. Australia was all butch when it comes to picking on tennis players from little old Serbia. But they go into a big craven cringe when it comes to tennis players from communist China. Lots more straight ahead on your Thursday Steyn Show.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
And Dan Wootton, join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Mark Steyn live on GB News TV and live on GB News Radio, or as live as I get this time of night. Let's get straight to your comments. Maria says via GB Views, many of us can't freely say what we wish at our places of work, etc. And when we hear you, we freely laugh and of course learn. Thank you for being you. Thank you for being you. I think that was some drippy soft rock song, got to number 27 in 1973, didn't it? That's very kind of you, Maria, but the point is always to speak freely. You'd be surprised how many people agree with you. The reason we need new outlets like GB News is because the shrinking of the parameters of the debate is one of the most disgusting things that has happened in supposedly free societies in the last few years. Michael says, "Hi, Mark. I think you will find that the private jet is an A321 on permanent charter to the UK government. Worth looking at whether that is a good deal, but that's a different matter. Also, probably worth considering that Liz Truss would have been supported by plenty of colleagues, so 20 of them gets you to about 360,000 or even more. Not far short of the 500,000. I love the way you think, Michael. 360,000. So the 140,000 is just like a little 140,000 quid is just a rounding up error. Boy, I must come for a weekend at your country pad. He says she could have flown in Vespina, the RAF A330, which might have been even more. The reason I mentioned the Tony Abbott flight from Sydney to Geneva, where he sat in economy class seat, is because he understood, he got what this kind of justification doesn't seem to appreciate, that there is none of these people should be on private flights. And in fairness to the royal family, I know a lot of you are anti-monarchists and don't care about it, but I well remember William and Kate. They were flown from, I think it was Vancouver, down to Los Angeles. So he landed as the heir to the Canadian throne and was flown in an RCAF bone shaker. If you've ever been in one of those, you'll know that's not new luxury. Then he flew from Los Angeles back to Heathrow as the heir to the throne of the United Kingdom, and he flew on British Airways, business class, William and Kate, and when they got there, British Airways was kind enough to upgrade them to first class. Prince William doesn't need to fly around on a £500,000 private flight. There's no need for Liz Truss. Not at a time when the government is under fire because of, and this has been particularly bad. This has been particularly bad these last 2 years. The gulf that has opened up between our rulers and the people they purport to rule is too wide. And that's why I'd rather have Abbott as leader of the UK Conservative Party, because whatever his views on things, he's a normal bloke who doesn't get freaked out at the idea of riding on a plane that includes people from outside his entourage. This is sick. No former British Foreign Secretary would think this was a normal way to carry on. And it rules Liz Truss out as the next leader of the Tory party, frankly. Anonymous asks, the English deserve the same autonomy from Westminster as the Scots. Yes or no? Yes. If you're going to have devolved parliaments for all the various kingdoms and principalities, for Scotland, for Northern Ireland, for Wales, you can't leave England out. England should have one too. Got no problem saying that. Keep your emails and tweets coming. Stump the Steyn will be right along before we close things out. I'm sorry if I'm in a bit of a cranky mood today. Tennis Australia. Oh, while I'm doing crankiness, I might as well do this. I hate that formulation, don't you? Tennis Australia. It used to be, I think, the Lawn Tennis Association of Australia, which is a boring name, but also a grown-up name, whereas Tennis Australia is modish and childish. So I'm only going to call it, it's like the Fahrenheit centigrade thing. I'm only going to call it the Lawn Tennis Association of Australia from now on. Anyway, the Lawn Tennis Association is currently hosting the Australian Open in Melbourne. Not all the great tennis players are present. As you know, the government booted out the #1 singles champ, Novak Djokovic, in order to give Celeste Patterson's nephew a better chance of winning. The world's #1 doubles player isn't there either. She's a lady called Peng Shuai, and a couple of months back she accused a former vice premier of China of trying to force his ace down her, and the Chi-Coms promptly disappeared her. No one knows where she is right now. No one knows, indeed, whether she's still capable of playing tennis. It's very easy to get questioned into unfitness when you're in Chinese custody. A spectator at the Open showed up in a T-shirt bearing the slogan, "Where is Peng Shuai?" and was forced to remove it. As I said, it's China's world. We just pay for it. Following the public outcry, Tennis Australia has now decided it will no longer force dissident spectators to remove their clothes, which I believe is what that big shot commie did to Peng Shuai in the first place. With me now is James McPherson from The Spectator. James, what's your take on what the Lawn Tennis Association says is supposed to be an apolitical event?
Well, Mark, I think maybe Peng Shuai's problem is she's not vaccinated. I think we'd be concerned about the sexual assault and her disappearance, but first we want proof of vaccination. And then we'll take care of that if the Novak Djokovic situation is anything to go by. But Tennis Australia said the T-shirts violated their strict policy banning political statements at the tennis, which is a bit rich. Tennis Australia themed last Wednesday First Nations Day at the Australian Open, highlighting Indigenous issues. Well, that's political. And then they themed Monday Pride Day, focusing on LGBTQ issues. And if you don't think that's political, have a talk to Margaret Court. And then Tennis Australia even distributed 5,000 rainbow flags so that spectators could draw attention to sexual differences, because apparently that's the only way to enjoy the tennis these days. But then the social justice warriors at Tennis Australia went and wet the bed over a couple of T-shirts drawing attention to a sexual assault victim. And so when it comes to political correctness, Tennis Australia are all signal and no virtue. They'd worked so hard to politicise the entire event, which is, rubber balls being hit across a string net. And yet, when it comes to a sexual assault victim who's been disappeared by a totalitarian regime, suddenly, you're not allowed to be political. Nothing to see here. So it's quite outrageous.
This is really I would love it, actually, if they were right and it was genuinely apolitical, because I'd love to go to anything that's not political these days, whereas it's very hard to actually just stroll into a store and buy an ordinary product from a corporation that isn't politicized in some ways. But this gets right to the whole phony baloney nature of the thing, that as you point out, we support Aboriginal rights, we support LGBTQ whatever rights, but a woman getting Me Too'd by some big shot Chinese Politburo guy, we don't want anything to do with that. There's a cowardice at the heart of all this moral narcissism.
Well, that is absolutely true, and sadly, Tennis Australia's behaviour over the past 2 weeks is typical of what's wrong with so much of Australia right now. Everyone's afraid of offending other people, and so afraid that we twist and contort ourselves into impossible and often contradictory positions. You wonder what's happened to just standing up for what's right or for freedom of expression. And the other thing about Tennis Australia is that they're mimicking the mini tyrants that seem to be everywhere in our country right now, making nonsense rules, bossing everyone around with orders about what to do, what to think, what to inject, and now weirdly, what to wear. It's quite ridiculous.
Do you think the backlash is sufficient here? They seem to have backed down, but basically because it's extraordinary. If you have to be forced to back down for a woman, a celebrity, a famous woman who has just been disappeared by the government. Now, we all heard this kind of stuff from Latin America in the 80s, where that's where the word comes from. People would be disappeared, the plane would fly out over the Atlantic and the bodies would be thrown out, and that'd be the last you'd ever see of them. But when you're actually doing it to people who are famous all over the planet, and democratic societies are scared of bringing it up, that's pretty terrible, isn't it?
It's a shocking state of affairs, Mark. And fortunately in Australia there was outrage about Tennis Australia's decision. Politicians, former players, the public were all very upset about it. And the only reason Tennis Australia changed their mind was because they were faced with the prospect that hundreds of spectators would turn up in these T-shirts. It's one thing for Victoria Police to enforce a communist dress code on a couple of people, but it would have looked absolutely embarrassing for police to have, asked hundreds of people to change their clothing. So Tennis Australia eventually changed their mind. But, they shouldn't expect they'll get any praise for it. If you'll excuse the pun, they've been all over the court on this issue. They didn't suddenly become proponents of free speech because they believe in it. They just calculated free speech was less damaging than bad optics. And they've got principles, but when those principles aren't working, you can be sure they've got other ones they can call upon.
OK, well, while we're thwacking around the old tennis terms, I think... What is it the guys say at the end of the game? New balls. That's what we need. Down under as elsewhere. Thank you very much, James McPherson. If James writes at the Spectator, by the way, down under, if you want to follow his thoughts. If you're starting to get the feeling China has bought up everyone in the Western world who matters, well, we're going to explore that a little further. Also, Stump the Steyn, what's on your mind? GBviews at gbnews.uk or via tweet at GBnews. Don't touch that dial. We will return momentarily.
Coming up on Dan Wootton Tonight, the unfiltered Toby Young joins star US journalist Megyn Kelly and GB News host Mark Dolan in providing world-class insight and analysis on the biggest news stories from around the globe. Plus, with the PM under continued fire as a result of Partygate, I'll get expert and balanced analysis from my superstar panel. The Tory grandee and broadcaster Michael Portillo, political editor of the Sunday Mirror Nigel Nelson, and Conservative commentator Dominique Samuels. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview Channel 236.
On Sky, we're Channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Mark Steyn live on GB News TV and simultaneously live on GB News Radio. No one is better at following the money than best-selling author Peter Schweizer, and in his latest book, he follows the money from Chairman Xi all the way to its many famous American beneficiaries, such as the Biden family, and indeed to famous beneficiaries within Her Majesty's Dominions, such as the Trudeau family. The book is called Red-Handed: How American Elites Get Rich Helping China Win. And Peter Schweizer joins me now. Peter, let me just start with a kind of follow-up to what we were talking about with James McPherson in Sydney, this little contretemps over someone wearing a supposedly anti-Chinese T-shirt at the Australian Open. And you make the point that in fact China is relatively relaxed about things like that because it sees them as a way of distracting people from the things that are actually important to the Chinese regime.
Yeah, that's right, Mark. There's a concept in Chinese intelligence and strategic thinking that began really under Chairman Mao. And loosely translated into English, it means a big help with a little bad mouth. And what they basically mean is that, look, they don't mind if Western political figures are, making statements about the Uyghurs or occasionally calling Beijing out on human rights issues. What matters to them are the key elements that they need for their national strategy to win the global competition. That is, they need as much unfettered access to Western capital as possible and as much unfettered access to Western technological knowledge as possible. If you as a political figure get out of the way in those areas and really don't impose any substantial restrictions, they are quite happy if you go and chatter on about the Uyghurs. They really don't care.
Yeah, it's interesting that. So when these little things flutter up around, when some Hollywood movie star is forced into backing down because he makes some statement about Taiwan, China has its long-term goals set, and it uses these little things that flare up pop culture issues as a kind of safety valve on people getting mad at China about the things that really matter.
Yes, that's right. Certainly they don't like the criticism, and they will pressure American corporations which cave all the time. But when it comes to political figures, they are less concerned about that. So, you take a political figure like Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House. She used to be very critical of China in her career. She actually unfurled a banner in Tiananmen Square condemning their human rights policy. But then her husband and son started going to China, striking deals, getting deals, and her position has evolved. And it's evolved to the point now where, yes, she will talk about the Uyghurs. She will even admit that there's genocide taking place, but she's not going to risk the Chinese relationship. And China is very happy for Nancy Pelosi to be exactly there.
Now, one of the things that it takes a while to dawn in your book, but when the penny drops fantastically, because we keep referring to the Biden family's links with China, and you say they've taken at least $31 million that we know about from China. And these things are referred to when they do make the papers as deals. But you suddenly realize, reading your book, there is actually no deal. Hunter and Joe Biden and Joe Biden's brother, Jim Biden, don't actually have to do anything for the money.
That's right. We've gone through the Hunter Biden laptop. We've also gone through a complete email file from one of Hunter's business partners. And what you find out, Mark, is that the Biden family got $31 million of a series of deals in China. And when you trace who actually made those deals happen, we were interested not just in the dollars amounts, not just in the fact of what the deals were, but who actually made them happen. And what you find, Mark, is that each and every one was arranged by a Chinese businessman with links to the highest levels of Chinese intelligence, meaning they're business partners with the vice minister for state security, they're business partners with the family of the former head of the Ministry of State Security. And there's no discernible public business service that the Bidens are performing for this money. And that's what's so disconcerting. So what to me has been a story about cronyism and corruption is now, frankly, a story about intelligence, espionage. And we have to ask the question directly and investigate the fact that the Biden family may very well be compromised.
Well, what's interesting is that the things in the laptop of Hunter Biden, the president's son, are shocking enough as it is. But you have to then figure that Chinese intelligence has got all sorts of other emails and texts on the Biden family that may have even worse things on them.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mark. You also have to entertain a very startling fact that we stumbled across. So Hunter Biden, while his father's vice president, is securing all these deals with these politically connected businessmen. And he does something very strange in 2014, summer of 2014. He goes to the United States Secret Service and says, I no longer want protection when I travel overseas. This is something the Secret Service doesn't want to do, but if requested, if demanded by somebody, they will do it. Why Hunter Biden did this, we don't know. I'm sure the fact that he was neck deep in using drugs had something to do with it. But the fact that he's doing these financial deals with these businessmen linked to Chinese intelligence, it seems pretty clear to me that Hunter Biden does not want U.S. law enforcement officials to know who he's meeting with when he takes these trips to China and elsewhere.
You have a good section in the book on Pierre Trudeau, Justin's dad, who was obsessed by China, really going back 60 years now. I think he went there sort of in the early 60s, and he fell in love with the place, which is an odd thing to do. But what seems to have happened more recently is that basically in the last 2 decades, all kinds of key figures around the Western world have been targeted by China and basically bought up by them. Has it reached a sort of critical mass?
I think it has. You certainly have the concerns about Joe Biden and his family, President of the United States and the first family. There are concerns about Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the U.S. Senate. There are concerns about the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. When you look in Canada, there have to be concerns about Justin Trudeau. Pierre Trudeau opened up diplomatic relations with China when he left office. He joined a law firm and he joined companies, and his job was to be a rainmaker based on his relationships in Beijing. So he would take Canadian and other businessmen over to Beijing to meet with his friends that were ruling the country, and he got paid fat fees for helping them close deals. The problem with that, Mark, is that that makes him entirely dependent upon staying in the good graces with the Beijing government. You fast forward to Justin Trudeau, you find the fact that the Trudeau family not only got paid money when the Chinese government decided to reissue Pierre Trudeau's book written 40 years earlier. We don't know how much they paid them. They actually bought the rights for Justin Trudeau's own memoirs. And there are additional financial ties involving Justin Trudeau's brother. So, yes, this is a major problem in the Western world. We need to deal with it aggressively, and we need to deal with it clearly.
Just to reiterate that last point you made, because it really is that simple. Justin Trudeau's publisher is the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, it's not actually that difficult to see where this is headed. And it is, from the Chinese point of view, it's relatively small amounts of money to buy these people up.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's interesting how cheap it is to buy American politicians, and sometimes not even buy them. Maybe you just need to rent them for a while. But in the case of the Trudeau family, it fits a model that they really like. It reflects sort of Chinese political culture. They like doing deals with Western political dynasties. So they've extended it with the Trudeaus. If you look in the United States, you have a similar situation with the Bush family, starting back in the 1980s when Prescott Bush, the brother of Vice President George W. Bush, started doing deals in Beijing. And flash forward to today, where you have Neil Bush, who is the brother of former President George W. Bush, who now heads up this Bush Center for the Study of U.S.-China Relations, which is funded by Chinese United Front groups, which are linked to the Chinese state. He also is on several corporate boards of politically connected companies in Hong Kong, and he's become a complete apologist for Beijing, going on Chinese state television and praising the regime and explaining how misunderstood human rights are in the country. It's a major problem. They like these kinds of intergenerational alliances that they have with the Trudeaus and with the Bushes.
Yeah, it's a very good investment if you can buy up 3 generations of a family, whether you're talking about the Trudeaus, the Bushes, the Bidens. It's a terrific read. I left my copy, in fact, on my nightstand because I was engrossed in it and stayed up till the small hours reading it. Thank you very much, Peter. The book is called Red-Handed, and it's available at all good bookstores unless their parent company's parent company is owned by a People's Liberation Army general. Time to do a quick bit of Stump the Steyn before we go. Ron on Twitter says, who would you rather be stuck on a desert island with, Prince Andrew or Boris Johnson? That is a nightmare. It does. You should pitch that to Paramount, though, Ron, because that sounds like a very good remake of The Odd Couple. Prince Andrew and Boris Johnson sharing a bedsit together. Sounds great fun. Brian, Sarah on Twitter. I like this one. This is literally how my cat has been laying for over 15 minutes in deep relaxation listening to Mark Steyn. You are hilarious, especially in a bad mood. For Stump the Steyn, which do you dislike more, Liz Truss or roundabouts? I'll take anything over Liz Truss. If you can find a roundabout, if you can find a mini roundabout, make that mini roundabout Tory Party leader. I like the way, by the way, who was this who asked, I don't know who it was, asked, did I write my own monologue at the top of the show? No, I have 37 writers to do it. That's how many it takes. 37. Come on, get back to work. I need a good line. I want a good line for the closing show of the show. Useless guys. That'll do it for me. I'm back tomorrow, but at an earlier hour, 7 p.m. GMT. Never fear, 2 hours of Dan Wootton are coming your way to thoroughly thrill your Thursday. Stay safe, stay free.
Hello again. Following a sunnier day for many of us compared to recent days, we'll see extensive clear skies overnight, and with winds becoming lighter as well, all the ingredients there for some frost and fog.